Okay, I thought it would be helpful to look at your required items for your document, your final project document, and kind of compare them to a project that did quite well at one point. And so, of course, course number, your name, and so forth, but Part D starts with an introduction stating the question of interest, giving some background information, and talking about, how this could be helpful somehow to have this information. And so, if we take a look at this particular paper, this was looking at the question of whether there's an association between socioeconomic status and the diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. And so here, they start right in there. They've got introduction, and with the, so notice. It wanted an introduction that was an item. They didn't write item number whatever. They said introduction because that's how you would introduce something. You wouldn't say item number, 2.7. Where was item number 1? Where was item number 2.1? Where was, that's, you just want to, if you want to label it, which is a nice idea, makes it easy for me to see that you have required items, but you don't do them by item number, D, all right? If you started this with a D, that would make no sense to somebody reading it. And so they just say introduction. And, so right away they give their question. Is there an association between these two things? And now, why are they interested in the topic? They mention a reference here as to why they might have been interested in this, or why anybody might be interested in this question. And they go on to say then their research hypothesis is that the socioeconomic status and diagnosis of anxiety disorder, there is an association, indicating there's a dependency between the two variables. Okay, so now they say lower socioeconomic status. Well, right? That's going to be one level of their variable, so they had a slight problem there with the saying the lower socioeconomic status, because the variable is socioeconomic status and also whether or not somebody has an anxiety disorder. Those are the two variables. Lower is one level or one value or one category of this status. Okay, so and they go on and they mention the intended population, people 25 to 57 who live in Kentucky. Okay, so hopefully their study, when they take data, it is from those people. Okay, if that's your relevant population, then that's who your data should come from. If your intended population is the whole world, you better have data from the whole world. If your intended population is, female 18-year-olds born in, I don't know, some particular Rabbit Hatch. I don't know if we have anybody from Rabbit Hatch, Kentucky, but, born in Rabbit Hatch, Kentucky, you could make the intended population very, very narrow. They narrowed it to Kentucky and these ages. And then they talk about why they decided to do that. So I think that's the end of that page. So notice they're telling me why. Okay, they didn't just state, okay, this is the population. They said why it's the population. And so this is a big part of, oops, well, works better if I kind of grab it and move it around here. And then they mentioned, so they went with 150 people fitting this criteria for the study, take a 5-question survey. Now, this is a very slight issue, but, they say, well, they want 150 people. They're going to use a survey. Well, probably if you want a decent response to surveys and so forth, there's a good chance that you would need to target way more than 150 people to get 150 decent responses. And by decent, they filled out the whole survey. They fit your criteria of being from Kentucky and so forth. So, you might need a lot more people than that. Okay, but there you go. There's their introduction. Let's go back and look. Okay, so they hit, in their introduction, they hit D, E, the intended population relevant to the study, and then they're on to their variables. Okay, so they're just kind of going right down this list. So variables of interest and any confounding variables. So let's go find that in here. And variables of interest and confounding variables. There you go. Kind of easy to see. But again, they didn't say item F or something like that. They just wrote it as you might expect it in any document. And so they've got their socioeconomic status, the explanatory variable. They've got their response variable. And here, they have some reference material that they looked at the Pew Research Center. So this is giving me confidence that they know what they're talking about when they do this. And they're very complete by using a nice reference there. Okay, and so they give us some background information. And here's the anxiety. The participant either confirms a diagnosis of anxiety or not. So it looks like it's a self-reporting sort of thing. Then they come down here to the confounding variables, and they mention age, region of residence, right? Are they from inner city, Appalachia, Western Kentucky in the farming areas out there, just bluegrass rural areas, where are they from? And whether they have health insurance. And so now, are there other possible variables? Yeah, sure, lots and lots of them. I don't remember if they, I don't think they ever mention it anywhere. You don't have to go with 100 confounding variables. In most studies, you'd only be able to limit it to so many anyway. And they've considered these 3. Now, tossing in a statement like, others could include, all right, and you give those, and then, but, we only use 3, okay? Only use these 3. That'd be fine. So here they talk about the age ranges, and they've decided to, go with age ranges. and they say a specific age, you know, and so see, they're explaining themselves. A specific age maybe isn't so important, so that's why they went with the age regions, and they tell us why. And here they mention that could the age ranges might be talking about various things, but in particular financial. And that's kind of important because that's the explanatory variable, is their socioeconomic status. And so it could be that the age ends up pretty much being the same thing as the socioeconomic status. Okay, so that was good of them to point that out right there. And hopefully they come back to it. So, and then here they talk about the regions, and again, they use a reference here. You know, they don't just say, oh, I'm going to do this. They actually look something up. Okay, so this is part of being complete and giving confidence in this plan that you're talking about. And, you know, here they talk about the health insurance, how that was assessed. And I guess we need to maybe go to the next page. Is that it? Okay. Oh, no. So sorry, I have to kind of go in and out with that. But whether or not they have it. Oh, and then see here they say there are other potential confounding variables, but we're not going to assess them in this study. So there you go. They mentioned it. You know, they let you know that these things could be there, but they can only do so much. Okay, so then you can say, well, oh, I don't like your study then because it doesn't take into account gender, or it doesn't take into account traumatic experiences. So, yeah, I'm not too impressed with it. I don't even know if I want to read it. That's okay. You know, you don't have to read it, right? You know, so that gets down to the variables. And so that was variables. That was F. Let's see, variables of interest. And then G, suggested methods of data collection. And so you see, and then a sample of the expected structure of that data collection. And so here they put it right out there. Here's that section. And so they say studies through the conduction of a survey. Now, I don't really like that conduction thing. Through the administration, right? But not a big deal. Okay, I mean that's those are edits and so forth, but they're not the meat of what's going on here. And so they're going to use surveys. You know, so. You know, they gave their age, their region. Now, you want to make sure that they could tell you what region that was, and you know, do they know what region that is? And whoops, didn't really need that. Okay, and so they're and see, now they have a sample form. Okay, so see how complete this is. They're pointing out how they're going to actually do this, and they've got the regions here. Now, you know, is that going to do it? Do you know whether you're from the Jackson Purchase or not? Yeah, you know, right? So the survey itself might be a problem. And so, you know, they may they may have to, you know, if you're going to really do this, this might need some work. Okay, and then annual income. Now, you know, again, these are smaller details that in the actual implementation could be a problem. You know, so annual income. Well, is that my household income, my own income? You know, what income? You know, so that's a detail that could be a little better. But hey, look, we've got a survey. We can see what they're talking about, and we can always improve on these if we see them. Now, if we never saw this, if I never saw this survey, I wouldn't know to, worry about, well, what kind of income are they talking about? And that's a problem. I mean, give more complete information. And so then, here's the expected structure of the data. And if we blow that up, we can see that, they would just have all their, here are the regions and the categories and status categories and so forth, right? So they would have some big data file that looked like this. And that seems to go with what they were talking about and their survey back here. So that's being complete, showing us what the data would look like. Now, notice they don't show us 150 rows. They just show us basically what's going on, okay? And then they jump in here and let's go back and look. Okay, so this sample of instructed. Now, a sample of tables, graphs associated with the data and box plots and scatter plots and so forth. Okay, so they're on I and they're looking at this sample of tables. Now, 10 different contingency tables. Now let's look to see, do they tell us why? What's going on here? The data from these tables were used to run 10 different chi-square tests to determine if our two variables of interest as well as confounding variables had dependency between each other. So here they're looking at that idea of I want to know everything about my data that I can. And so, for instance, here they aren't actually running tests yet. They're just looking at things they could do. And so here it says anxiety and status. So here are our two main variables right off the bat. And they've added up their counts. And they see, low, middle, high status with yes or no anxiety. And actually, it's interesting as I look at this, there does seem to be something going on here, right? And I can just see that real quickly from the tables in that there are more no's than yeses in the low economic status, and there are more yeses than no's in the high economic status. So it sort of looks like if these were numerical things, I can just see very quickly from that table that here's status and here's anxiety. And so it looks like, there's sort of a trend that goes like this, is that the higher your economic status, the more anxiety you have. Possibly. Again, this isn't real data. They're just kind of making things up. But, yeah, very important right there. There are my two variables of interest, and I get a table. Now, again, if they were numerical, I'd probably want to see a scatter plot. If one of them was numerical, if the anxiety was numerical and the status was um, categorical, or even the other way around, although we don't know how to do the other way around. But I would expect to see box plots, right? So, box plots would be a great way to go here for this, so numerical and numerical up here, categorical for the explanatory and numerical for the response here with box plots. Those would be good. And then here they had categorical for both, and so they used a table, a contingency table. But there's a table. Now notice here we're on page 5. Okay, page 6, more tables. More tables. So what are they looking at? Well, notice they're looking at all these combinations. Health insurance and status. Do those seem to have something going on, right? Age and status. Is there something going on there? And that I would expect to probably see something there. Is that I would expect to see. Now, again, they're just making up their numbers, but I would expect to see lower status for younger ages. So I would expect to see a bigger count up here, and then higher economic status for higher ages and a big count down here. And so I would be actually more amazed if there weren't. And so I would expect that if I ran for those two variables, if I ran a chi-squared test on these, I would expect to reject age 0. In other words, I would expect a dependency here. Okay, so I would expect a very small p-value. Now they aren't doing that yet, they're just showing the tables. Now, again, they told us a little, here's where they start to get a little weak in their analysis. So, they say they're looking for this dependency with each other, but they don't really say much about it though, right? They do all the tables, which is great. I mean, that's nice and complete, and so they are checking all these different things. So remember what they had. They had a total of one response in the 4 variables, right? So if I did the response variable with the explanatory variable, and then the response variable with the confounding 1, response, confounding 2, response, confounding 3, if I looked at all of those, and then also looked at the explanatory with each of those. Okay, so I had 4 there. I'll get 3 more there. And then if I compare C1, C2, C3, and so forth, so I could have, one more there, another one there, and then finally one there. It looks like about 10. And what did they say? 10. So see, they looked at every combination of their variables, and that is complete. That you ought to do. And that's another reason you probably want to limit your study to, not too many confounding variables, because you really want to look at all these different things. So again, here's health insurance and anxiety, age and anxiety. Now, I'd probably put anxiety over here every single time that anxiety is in it, because it's the response variable. But that's just me. That's the way I would do it. There's nothing in particular with contingency tables. There's nothing to say one way or the other. But so, there they have each of these tables. Okay, and so they went through all of those. And so that's great. They should have said more about them, right? Okay, again, here we see, like, what's this, health insurance and region, and and if you look, it looks like Western has a better situation with health insurance, right? This looks like there's definitely a dependency between where you're from and whether you have insurance. And that's good to note, okay? Now, they don't have to run the test right here. They could. Now, and I probably would, right? I would probably show each one of these and run a test to go with it, but they should at least be talking about, what you see here. Okay, so that's a place where they fell down a little bit. Okay, and again, it hurts the analysis some that way. Okay, now here they did test not utilized. I don't feel a great need for somebody to put that in. It didn't hurt. Now, if this was a regular paper, I would say, oh no, no, not at all. That was silly, right? But this is for a class, right? So this was nice that they pointed out, they maybe thought about some of these other tests, didn't want to use them. But I would say this was kind of an extra bit of work here that they didn't necessarily need. Okay, and then this is more of it, and why they didn't want to use them. And then they say, okay, here's what we did use. Okay, and they mentioned the chi-square and went through and why the chi-square seems to work for this. Great. Okay, that's a good thing. So now they get into the actual work with the statistical tests. So let's go back here. Okay, so we're at H, example structure, then I, a sample of tables and graphs. So they did that. J, tests, why was it chosen? And they had all categorical data, so they were really stuck with the chi-square. If their response had been numerical, they could have gone with ANOVAs or regression, but we just don't know how to handle with a categorical response. We just don't really know how to handle it other than with chi-square. Okay. Now, a discussion of how your what is this, K? A discussion of how your choice of statistical tests impacts your work with confounding variables. Okay. Statistical test impact. So there, they put something in to incorporate the confounding variable as the chi-square was used. We would run chi-square tests for each variable if they, okay, great. That's what they would do. It's weak. Now, why? We learned about blocking. We did that in, I think, our very first module, right? So in module 1, we did some blocking. And in what would it have been? I think module 4, we did some blocking with the chi-square. So they absolutely should have mentioned doing some sort of blocking in that chi-square. So that was a weakness in their statistical analysis. Now, a huge weakness, I didn't consider it real huge because they did address the confounding variables, okay, and they are going to look at them. They just didn't quite bring them in the way they really should, and that would be the blocking. If you're doing something like analysis of variance, we would also need some sort of blocking. And and then regression, we don't, the blocking itself, we can just run everything at once and then start knocking things out that we shouldn't have in our model. And so that's not quite the same idea as blocking. Okay. Now, and so how might they have handled that? Well, let's look at their chi-square. So here they went through the chi-square and they start with status and anxiety. Perfect. Okay, because those are their main variables. So they started with that. And in this case, with their made-up data, they got a big a p-value much bigger than 0.05. And so they would have to decide that they didn't have the evidence, at least on the surface yet. Okay, this is just this. This is where the blocking comes in. And this is what they didn't do. So they did a nice test here, and they ran a bunch more with all, I think they ran 10 of them. That's why they have so much stuff here. Okay, and each time they told me what they were doing. So they ran those 10, but what they really, let's find the first one. Yeah. So what they really probably should have done was either run this separately for the different health insurance and so forth. So they could have had one table, or one test for health insurance, yes, and another one for health, no, right? And they could have looked at those separately like we did in the modules, and they could have come up with answers then. And who knows what they would have come up with. They might have come up with, here with health insurance, yes, P could have been less than 0.05, and with health insurance, no, greater than 0.05. So, there didn't seem to be any link when you don't have health insurance, but if you did, there did seem to be a link between these two things, the socioeconomic status and the anxiety. Okay, what the heck does that mean? I don't know. I mean, it could mean that if I have the insurance, I have the ability to be diagnosed. Oh, yeah, I have the ability to be diagnosed, and therefore I could tell you I've been diagnosed with anxiety. If I don't have health insurance, oh, well, yeah, maybe I can't tell you I've been diagnosed with anxiety, and so that's a problem. And, but we aren't going to be able to see that unless they're split out somehow. So one way would just be to split the numbers and only do the numbers that go with health insurance, yes, and only do the numbers that go with health insurance, no, and see how that works out. Now, another thing one could do is you could split those numbers out, but just in that case have twice as many columns or twice as many rows, depending on how you did that split. But I would probably do twice as many columns because that's the socioeconomic status. So I would have, for instance, a column for low socioeconomic status and health insurance, and then low and no health insurance, and then a medium and a yes, and so forth. Okay, that would be another way to go, and that would have blocked it by this health insurance. It's, in essence, you've made the explanatory variable into category with 6 levels instead of 3 levels. Okay, but the health insurance then is part of that. And if all of a sudden that has a small p-value, then taking health insurance into account did make a difference. Okay, And, you know, that's a similar comment for other stuff. So here's, you know, the status and health insurance. Now, these are important because, again, you know, if I found that these were highly associated, highly dependent, then I could decide that maybe I don't need to factor in the health insurance, okay, because it really just goes along with socioeconomic status. You know, pretty much maybe I would predict, oh, low socioeconomic status, no health insurance. Medium status, oh, some health insurance. And then high status, lots of health insurance, right? And so if that's the case, then I don't necessarily need that variable, okay? They didn't really talk about that. So again, that's a weakness, okay? The analysis portion of this was a little bit weak. It wasn't horribly weak in that they set up the groundwork for it. Okay, they did tests that you needed to do. They just didn't do a lot with it. Okay, so here the resulting p-value 0.89 says status and age indicated that the two variables are independent. Okay, so if status and age are independent, I probably want to keep age in there because it may explain a medical reason, that sort of thing. If they were highly dependent, again, as I thought they might be in real data, if that were the case, then you could possibly throw age out because it didn't really add any information, okay? But since they're independent, we want to keep them both in there. But again, we should probably block by age, okay? And there were, what, 3 ages, I think, 3 groups. So we'll keep track of that. So with 3 groups, so if you've got 3 socioeconomic status, 2 health insurance, 3 of the age groups, and if all these things looked independent of each other, well, I could again turn these columns into, instead of 3 columns here, well, I could have had 6 columns from that, and then for one, you know, split them up again by age group, that's 18 columns. And I could have run something with 18 columns, and each would be a different combination of these 3 things. Okay, so that would be a way to block. Again, I could just run 3 columns, but 6 different times to do that. And again, that's where they were weak. Okay, on that actual analysis, they were weak on that, and so here they mentioned similar stuff. Okay, and they do this for each one of these, and that's great. The only problem is that they really didn't pull it into the blocking aspect of things, or the getting rid of particular columns of data or particular variables. You know, or in, you know, like when it was independent, they didn't say, oh, we definitely want to keep this variable then. Yeah, well, you know, like I say, that was a weakness. Interpretations of results. Okay, here they go through and, you know, they talk about the chi-square tests and what those meant. They mention the null hypotheses again. They say they take into account the confounding variables. Okay, and they just restate that with what they were, and chi-square tests for each. If they had an association with anxiety and socioeconomic status. So you see, they're mentioning that is important. So they kind of got it there, but they didn't quite pull it together with then, again, the blocking idea. And that's a big deal, okay? And so, and notice they took a while to talk about that, and they come up with, here's kind of their conclusion, I guess. Therefore, the two variables under examination are dependent for the case in which we rejected null. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of funny wording there. Whereas the variables under independent, where they weren't. Okay. Again, that word conduction there is just not a great word. Chi-square, test of independence, data collected. There's not a dependency. Okay. Now, that was definitely what they found way back at the beginning. That very first p-value was 0.16, and that was true. And so that's great. Their conclusion flows from that. Again, however, a bit weak in that they didn't really pull in the blocking to see if there was a more subtle relationship. Okay, and then they go through reflection on the project as they were supposed to do, and we've got that. And then they've got their references nicely listed here, with as much information as they could get when they retrieved it and so forth. Here, this one has a lot of information up here. These not as much, but a nice link to get to it. Okay, let's go back to our requirements. So here we had L was an example of what I'm sorry, I can't really mark on this. I'm sort of marking it. Every once in a while you'll see it move because I'm trying to mark on it. But I couldn't have two things open at once to mark on, as it turned out. So this one, I'm just kind of going through. And, if I was more familiar with this particular app, I might be able to highlight stuff in here, but I'm not sure how. So bear with me on the L. So L, they gave a bunch of those statistical results, what they would look like and so forth, and then how they would be interpreted. And so they did all of these things, a reflection, they had that, and appropriate references used, and they were cited. So they had every item in very complete form. Now, they just didn't pull everything off beautifully. So let's look at points. Yeah, the first one, required items. They had it. They had all that, 12. Flow and grammar, very, very nice. I mean, there are a couple things I would have done differently, but hey, very nice, 10 points. So top is 12, the bottom 10, and then let's look at the other stuff. Interpretation provides accurate and complete explanation of the steps taken. Oh, definitely. I could follow everything they were doing. That was great. Evidence, data gathered and discussed in a way to provide confidence. Very much. Remember, they said, they talked about regions of Kentucky, and they had a citation as to what these regions were. They weren't just making it up on the fly and so forth. So great confidence in their data gathering. Statistical applications and analysis, appropriate statistical tools and techniques are utilized. No. They did very well. I was very, very happy with it. Again, this is a first class, an introductory class, so that was fine. But no, they did not get the maximum. They didn't talk about the blocking and so forth. But they did mention how they were trying to use the confounders. They were trying to use them for the right thing. They had the right idea, but they just didn't pull it off that well. Okay, so 3. Technological applications, did they utilize everything? Oh yeah, their templates were used beautifully. They did all that. The assumptions, they went through why they were using the particular tests they were using, what the assumptions were for that test. Great. That was fantastic. So that was a 4. Conclusions, appropriate conclusions. No, not quite again, because they didn't do that complete statistical analysis. That affected their conclusions a bit, and therefore, their conclusions weren't incorrect for what they had. It was a little incomplete in the actual analysis, and therefore in the conclusions. And so that one also, I went with a 3 because it was pretty darn good. And then finally, I had to look at their VoiceThread stuff, and that was fine. So so that was a 4. So they ended up with 48 out of 50 on this. But notice now, do you need 25? Whoops, I need to go here. Do you need 25 pages? Oops, try that again. No, for one, back here somewhere. Right, I said this, that one, that wasn't needed. They didn't, and then that even went down to, some of this stuff here, right? That wasn't needed. So they had, nearly, almost 2 pages that they didn't even need. So that would have taken them down to 23. They could have fit things a little smaller in places. So again, you look at all these big templates that they had here, there, all these big templates. They didn't need to make them that big and so forth, but they did need to talk about doing those types of comparisons. Now, did they have to show each and every one of them? No. Could they have shown maybe half of them and talked about the rest? Absolutely. Okay, so again, they didn't need all of that stuff. But, then, and the same thing with the tables, the tables, they could have given about half the tables, the same half that they did analysis for here, the most important ones probably would be the thing to do. But they could have cut down on that a little bit. But, most of their wording and so forth, that stuff, they needed it all. Okay, so definitely they probably needed at least 15 pages to really hit everything. Okay, but here is an example of one that did very complete work, and that is what I'm looking for. It's not all correct. I don't agree with all the wording and that sort of thing, but they hit all these ideas from the course, and they put some thought into what they were doing. And was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect, but it was darn good. Okay, so there you go. That is a long video, but this is a big project. Okay, so there you go. Hopefully that helps.